Thank you all for being with us and for your patience so far. We are still waiting for one member of the family to arrive. So as we wait, Anne will continue playing. And for those of you watching online, feel free to share stories and memories with one another. And you all as well, feel free to spend some more time in conversation with one another as we wait. And the service will begin shortly, but just wanted to let you all know that we're still waiting for one member of the family to arrive before we begin the service. Thanks. You may be seated. Thank you for being with us here at Grace and for also joining us online as we celebrate and remember Eric's life together. For Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and I am life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, they shall live, and whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. I hold the keys of life and of death, and because I live, you shall live." So we have gathered together to praise God and witness to our faith as we celebrate and cherish the life of Eric Martin Jayne together. We come together in grief, and we must acknowledge our loss, and yet we must also celebrate the greatness of his life. So together we ask that God might grant us grace, that in our moments of pain we would know comfort, that in our sorrow we would still have hope, that in death we would see the resurrection, for our hope is found in Christ, and it is with this hope that we celebrate both God's eternal promise to us all and Eric's life together. Let us pray. Holy God, your love never ends. We pray to you for one another in this time of need and for all those, anywhere, who mourn with us this day. God, show us your peace. Help us to know your presence in this moment so that in our weakness we might find strength in you. In our loss we can feel your love. May we know and share your mercy and grace and keep true your goodness, which has held us together and brings us into this moment with one another. Eternal God, we praise you for the great company of all those who have gone before us, who now rest from their labor in your eternal home. We praise you for each one of those who has gone before us as we name them in our hearts before you now. And gracious God, today especially we praise you for Eric, knowing that you have received him into your presence. So to all of these and to all those that have gone before us, may we know your peace is here. May the perpetual light of your love shine upon us and help us to believe where we have not yet seen, with your presence and spirit leading us through all of our years until we are at last with them in the joy of your heavenly home, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. For those of you in the sanctuary with us, I'd invite you to grab one of the red pew hymnals, one of the red hymnals, and we are going to join together in singing hymn number 62, All Creatures of Our God and King. And one thing to notice about this hymn is that the final two verses, verses 6 and 7, are on the right page of the hymnal just under the frame. So we will be singing all verses of hymn number 62, All Creatures of Our God and King. reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak in tongues of human beings and of angels but don't have love, I am a clanging gong or a clashing cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and I know all the mysteries and everything else, and if I have such complete faith that I can move mountains but don't have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything that I have and hand over my own body to feel good about what I've done, but don't have love, I receive no benefit whatsoever. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love isn't jealous. It doesn't brag. It isn't arrogant. It is not rude. It does not seek its own advantage. It isn't irritable. It doesn't keep a record of complaints. It is not happy with injustice, but it is happy with the truth. Love puts up with all things, trusts in all things, hopes for all things, and endures all things, for love never fails. As for prophecies, they will be brought to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will be brought to an end. We know only in part, we prophesy only in part, but when the perfect comes, what is partial will be brought to an end. And when I was a child, I used to speak like a child, reason like a child, think like a child, but now I have become an adult, and I have put an end to childish things. Now we see a reflection in a mirror, but then we will see face to face. Now I know partially, but then I will be completely known in the same way that I am completely known. For now faith, hope, and love remain, these things, and the greatest of these is love. Today, we have gathered to celebrate and to reflect on Eric's life together, to witness to our faith and to trust in the goodness of this love that guides us to this moment. We remember the times that you were able to share with him, for God's love has brought us together so that we would not forget, but continue to live out with the legacy of this love. So today, and in the days to come, remember the witness and the goodness of Eric's life by continuing to share stories and memories, by cherishing the gift of his life and living into the legacy that he has passed on to us. And for those of you that are watching online, thank you very much for joining us and for being with us as we celebrate Eric's life together, spread apart around the world, even though we are in this moment with and for one another in spirit. Eric's life was tragically cut short. And while we can take solace in remembering that Eric passed, preparing to do what he loved with the people and places he loved, we cannot help but grieve the loss of this love in our lives. The greatness of this loss is felt because we experienced the greatness of his love, and we read about that in 1 Corinthians 13, where faith, hope, and love remain, but the greatest of these is love. For love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It is not happy with injustice, but is happy with the truth. Love puts up with all things, trusts all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. For the greatest of these is love. Now, St. Francis of Assisi is known as the patron saint of animals and the environment for expressing this love back towards creation. And that hymn that we sang just a few moments ago, All Creatures of Our God and King, was written by St. Francis of Assisi, reminding us that creation and everything within it is our sibling, that this world is not here to be used or exploited, but should be cherished, protected, and embraced. And I don't know if Eric ever realized how much of his life echoed the hopes of St. Francis, but I do recognize a quote from St. Francis that Eric seemed to live by. St. Francis once said, "Start by doing what is necessary, then do what is possible, and suddenly you are doing the impossible." When it comes to what was necessary for Eric, that was often what some of us might think was impossible. Because one thing that Eric did that wasn't just possible but was necessary, Winnie told me about next week, which was decorating a Christmas tree for Camilla Mitchell when she was 90 years old and a widow that didn't have any Christmas decorations. It was Eric's idea not just to get Camilla the tree, but to decorate it and then bring others along to get them involved as well. The story made the news, and Eric was quoted in that story as saying that the idea just popped into my head. Anyone could have thought of it. And I suppose it's true that anyone could have thought of it. Anyone could think as we went by someone's house, it's a little sad that they don't have any decorations up. I wonder if they just don't have the energy or ability to do it. And Eric knew this woman because he had done odd jobs with her in the past. A lot of us can think that person might need some help. This might make them happy. But Eric just didn't have that thought. He lived it out, and he got others involved as well. In that same news story, Camilla said, "Now I have had love and affection for Christmas. There is nothing more in the world I could have asked for." Or think about how Eric rode from the base of Mount Rainier to Washington, D.C., where he delivered a petition with signatures to the Iowa delegation in Congress to protect Arctic wildlife and refuge spaces in Alaska from oil drilling. Now, we know a bike ride like that is possible. It might even be necessary for us to stand up and fight for climate justice, but how many of us would think a ride like that seems impossible? But it was necessary. It was something that was possible, and it was something that Eric did. A number of you with us in the sanctuary, and I'm sure some online, joined a Facebook page with tales and legends of Dr. Eric Jayne, DMV. And on that page, it has been a joy to see numerous pictures of houses that Eric built or restored, some miles away in Alaska from anything only accessible by plane or dog sled. Other pictures of clinics where Eric worked, where he had spay-a-thons and various events. There was one person that shared a story from Arkansas where Eric was getting ready to help with a spay-a-thon that was sponsoring a trip to Alaska, but the funding that they needed for that trip fell through. Now, some of us might think, well, if the funding for an event fell through, that must be the end of the story, but for Eric, it was an opportunity. So he started to talk with someone that was putting on that event, and they found out that, well, the deck that they have needs a little work. So why don't you buy the supplies for the deck, I'll do all the labor, and then you just pay for this trip, and it's all of a sudden possible again. That deck is still standing, and it looked pretty good from the pictures that person put online, even though it's been 5 years since Eric built it. Or Jerica shared a story about a horse somewhere in remote Alaska whose owners had run out of food one winter, and they didn't really have a way to get any more food for their horse. So Eric worked with them, and they figured out that the horse could eat salmon for a season. Now, generally, we don't think of horses eating fish. That's not the kind of thing that comes to mind, but Eric knew that it would be okay. The horse ate it and lived through the winter on salmon. Jerica went on to write, when reflecting about that story, "I think about it all the time, and surely Eric was the only veterinarian they could get any help from too, in their situation, as with most people he helped." One of the stories that was shared that stuck with me the most was from Tammy. Tammy wrote about having a lot of fun and memories with Eric in Hawaii and how they visited a cat sanctuary there, and on the ride over the waves were a little more raucous than usual, but Eric kept her distracted with humor. He would make her laugh until she cried. But she wrote that one of the most precious moments that I've ever personally experienced and had the honor of seeing happened at the end of that most amazing day, a day so full of adventure, fun, and laughter and joy. Eric and I were walking down the streets in Maui when a man came walking towards us. He appeared to be homeless. He was talking, but neither of us could understand what he was saying, and as he approached us, Eric looked at him very kindly and said, "Hey, buddy, are you okay?" At that very moment, I was glad Eric was focused on this homeless man because my eyes started to tear up. Because, to be brutally honest, I don't think I know anyone else who would have shown this man the kind of respect that Eric did in that moment. Eric's life and the stories that you have shared reminded me of another quote from St. Francis of Assisi. Perhaps the most well-known quote that is attributed to St. Francis is this: "Preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words." And at the core of the gospel is this consistent reminder that the greatest of these is love. We can have all knowledge, we can know all things, we can put an end to every mystery, but if we don't have love, we are a clanging gong or a noisy cymbal. It doesn't matter what we know if we have no love to push it forward. Love is patient, love is kind, love throws a Christmas party for a widow, love raises awareness about climate justice, love says to one another, "Are you okay?" As many of you know, Eric recently received his master's degree in Indigenous law from the University of Oklahoma and then became the Indigenous Program Medical Director for the Animal Balance and was actively working on constructing a veterinary clinic on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. Following Eric's passing, this is what Animal Balance wrote. Eric was becoming the leader to stamp out racism against Indigenous peoples everywhere. He was gentle and graceful with his words. He was leading us into a new era. He was carefully navigating Indigenous law so that he could bring in resources to tribes to allow for self-determination. Because love does not rejoice in injustice, but it rejoices in the truth. Because love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious, boastful, or arrogant, or rude. Love simply is the greatest. And that is the love that we are witnessing to today. The love that Eric and Sally lived with to establish the Sovereign Nations Veterinary, to empower, educate, and entrust sovereign nations and indigenous peoples to have the vital veterinary care that they need in ways that are accessible and affordable, seeking to honor the sovereignty, tradition, and heritage of those indigenous persons. And whether you are with us online or here in the sanctuary, you are here because you felt this love, because you experienced this goodness, because you saw the gospel that Eric lived with even when he didn't have to use words. Eric lived another echo of St. Francis because he lived out the hope of this prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me show love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. And for mercy's sake, O divine Master, grant that I might not seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. We trust and we know that with the love that Eric lived with, he has been born into eternal life, and now the love that he shared with us is ours to continue with one another. Eric's legacy is now ours, and while it might seem impossible to live with the goodness of his life, it's necessary, and it's what we're here to commit ourselves to. Because Eric showed us in so many ways that the impossible is possible, and not only that, it is necessary. In large and in small ways, we can be shaped and we can be transformed by love. In the Gospel of John, there's this long passage where Jesus teaches the disciples while sharing the Last Supper with one another. And while around the table, Jesus says to them, "A new commandment I give to you. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are one of my followers if you have love for one another." And just after telling the disciples that, a few verses later, Jesus goes on to tell them this: "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God and believe also in me, for in my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and I will take you there so that you can be with me, so that where you are, I am, and you may be there also." We are not left alone. We are embraced and we are loved. And there is this love and this legacy that we are here to witness and to devote to continuing. At the end of St. Francis Assisi's life, it's said that he wrote these words: "Men lose all the material things they leave behind them in this world, but they carry with them the reward of the charity and the love that they give. For these they will receive from the Lord the reward and recompense they deserve." And if St. Francis is right, that even though we lose everything in this life, we carry forward the charity and the love and the alms that we give, what reward can we imagine that Eric received? Because Eric was, is, and always will be a beloved child of God, and God's grace gives us the hope that this is not the end, but a new day where we can strive to share the same love with one another, where we can know what is necessary, what is possible, and find ourselves doing the impossible, where we preach and share the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words, because the greatest of these is love, and we can and we must share this love with one another. Now, in our service, we are going to have a brief time available for you all to offer stories and memories before we have the reception downstairs following the service. But before I invite you to think about stories or memories that you would like to share, I want to share a couple of things that were written by Eric's sisters, Dory and Andrea. Dory writes, "My memory of my brother Eric. We were best friends growing up, and I adored him. He was the best brother a sister could have. We told each other our hopes and dreams as kids and into adulthood. We shared our excitement for holidays and had our birthday celebrations together, since his birthday was September 2nd and mine was September 4th with a 2-year difference. We were very close. He was my buddy. I could always count on my brother as a friend, and I was looking out for him since the 2-year age difference, so I can remember him wanting to keep me safe. We had many adventures in childhood, exploring new places. I remember climbing trees together, having lemonade stands together, playing together with snow forts, playing in puddles together, swinging over rivers with ropes, setting out on a walk down the Des Moines River with tents and our backpacks in the winter. That was when we were teenagers. I remember pooling our saved allowance together to buy gifts for our parents and how excited we were for them to open them. One of Eric's favorite movies when we were kids was My Side of the Mountain, a story about a boy who leaves home and lives in the wilderness in a hollowed-out tree and fends for himself with his wilderness skills that he taught himself. We often talked about that story. Even though by circumstance we didn't see each other in person for many years, we've had long phone conversations. I remember one lasting 5 hours, and we always said, "I love you," when ending a phone call, and these would have been the last words I had spoke to my brother. He was one of the most influential people in my life, sharing his love of adventure and the outdoors when we were kids, and I will always hold him close in my heart. Andrea writes, "When we lived at 533 Polk Boulevard, Eric and I's bedrooms shared a wall. My room was all pink and frilly, full of toys and dolls. Eric's room was cool, but kind of creepy at the same time. He had a homemade laboratory with shelves full of Invisible Man types of models and lab equipment. He also had a complete set of encyclopedias and a lot of aquariums with all sorts of creatures, mainly snakes and turtles. I loved hanging out in Eric's room as long as the lights were on. He put up with me, his grubby little sister, hanging around tolerably most of the time. One time we had an argument. I don't remember why. I had probably overstayed my welcome in his room. I must have been 4 or 5 at the time. Anyway, I was lying around on my floor, kicking my door because our house was so old, and some of the old oak doors had big glass mirrors on them. The one on the back of my door had become loose and began falling towards me. Suddenly, Eric runs into the room and catches the mirror before it falls on me. He was pretty scrawny then. I remember his skinny arms straining as he caught the mirror. This was the first time I remember my brother being there for me, something he always was. You took good care of me, Eric, and I'm still here. I can take it from here. You did a good job. If there are any persons that would like to share stories and memories, I'd invite you to come forward. And if you can't come forward, I could bring a microphone to you, but we have 2 mics set up down at the church if anyone would like to come forward and say a few words at this time.
My name is Charlie. I'm Eric when I was 6 years old. I didn't meet Eric the normal way. Our mothers were walking down the street, and when they met each other, my mom said, "What's your name?" And Mrs. Jayne said, "Nancy Jayne." She said, "Oh, that's my daughter's name, Nancy Jayne and Nancy Jayne." So they were friends for a very long time. They also were Girl Scout leaders. So anyway, Eric just showed up at my house. I didn't know who he was. And he wanted to go for a walk in the park. And so that pretty much started our friendship that lasted for decades. Every single year, Eric was 3 years older than me. Most of the time we spent walking in the park or running in the park or climbing trees. And it continued into Iowa City, moved to Iowa City, met his brother-in-law, Roger, on Ragbri. And then I met his brother-in-law, Roger, in Iowa City, all over town. And I'd meet Roger with Eric. Then I'd meet Roger somewhere in town. I swear to God, 6 months went by, and neither one of us realized we were the same person we had met on Ragbri. Every time we met Eric, we were helping Eric move some big, heavy thing. Anytime we ever met each other anywhere else in town, we were on a bike. And so the joke is, we didn't recognize each other with our real clothes on, so. I was with Eric with one of his snakes in childhood, and we decided we wanted to leave and go play, and he put the snake in the closet. We learned that snakes don't stay in closets. His father was out of town, and his mother and 2 sisters all slept in the same room for about a week because the snake was loose in the house. Fortunately, they finally caught the snake in the same room where they were all sleeping. So, rescuing snakes kind of happened because of Eric. I was in Iowa City, stopped at a friend's house, and every single thing we picked up in the backyard, there were snakes under it. So we grabbed a bucket, and I swear to God, we filled the bottom of this bucket with snakes, and they weren't long enough to get out of the bucket. And my plan was to go over to another snake guy's house and leave the snakes. And I stopped at my house first, and made a big mistake. My roommate looked in the bucket and jumped 5 feet in the air and screamed and didn't speak for a week. He didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. One snake is fine, but you look in a bucket and they're all squirming around. It's really awful. I don't have a problem with one, but a bucket was hard. Anyway, brought it over to another friend's house and left the snakes. But rescued bats because of Eric. Then found out that if you rescue bat in the fall, you want to bring it someplace because it doesn't have enough food to last over the winter. And there's a woman in Ames that called a bat lady. She has a refrigerator in the basement to keep bats. and lets them out in the spring. One of the first jobs, I think it was the first job Eric got, there was a country vet, and his son took over the clinic. And basically, he created a situation where vets could get out of college and work for a while and then start their own clinic. And my brother got involved in a clinic and started another clinic for the same purpose. The spay clinic in Des Moines is out of that. There are a few things I wanted to share with Eric, some really bad jokes, because Eric always told something a little funny. And one of his favorite sayings that I really liked was anytime any kid or myself came up and, can I get a glass of water? Can I use the bathroom? Oh, no, thanks for asking. No, but thanks for asking. Oh, it's really fun to use it on small kids. This would be a joke that he would have probably said, what do you call a deer with no eyes? No idea. What do I call a deer with no eyes and no legs? Still no idea. Or dinner. So anyway, I just wanted to say how much I love Eric. And I'm also very grateful to Carlos because he went to school again later in life and got a degree. And that's been an inspiration for me. I recommend, unfortunately, I might have not brought it. Yeah, I did. Okay. Looking for Alaska. It's such a good book that I read it twice. So anyway, this is also interesting. Found out that a walk across America was one of the roots of why he went across country on a bike. And then he met the author Peter Jenkins in Alaska. And when Sally died, I found out I already had this book. And then I found I had the other version of the book, this is just the first half, and then he wrote across the rest of the half of America. Anyway, Eric made a big impact on my life, and I miss him greatly. And I'm glad everybody's here to say goodbye to my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Suzanne Hartline. I'm reading this on behalf of my husband, Ross Hartline. So this is Ross's voice. I've known Eric for 50 years, and in that time he became a family member. We had many projects and adventures from the time I was 14, riding bikes with Eric and my brother towards Washington, D.C., and most recently helping with his projects at the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. All of the projects were fun adventures where Eric and I learned to communicate with just simple gestures. And maybe because of that, we never got in an argument or a fight, despite the difficult projects we were doing. Some of those gestures you might be familiar with, from his hand signals to some of his odd facial expressions. If you want to see some examples, Ross can show you later. Sally brought Eric back to Des Moines and back into our lives with many future projects planned. At Rosebud, we pitched in on a standard Eric project with an overwhelming amount of work to get done in a very short period of time. Also typical of Eric, this effort supported Kathy Woodenknife's vision of animal care in her community, including creating a veterinary clinic from an unused building and pulling together a diverse crew of characters willing to contribute each person's particular skills. Late on one of the final days there, I talked to Eric about running short on drywall, having at least 1 pound of drywall on my shirt. And Eric said, oh wow, I really better get some drywall at Menards. He and Sally were going to leave the project early, something he rarely did, and Eric admitted he wanted some alone time with her. I teasingly said, you like Sally? And Eric said, yes. And he gave me one of his three-quarter smiles. And I pressured him a bit more, saying, you really like Sally. And Eric responded with his epic glowing smile, which is rarely seen. I didn't say anything, but I was thinking in my head, oh, wow. On the day before his accident, Eric called me because he wanted to see my mom, so we stopped by her apartment. My mom gave Eric some gifts, polar bears, that's her trademark. And Eric asked me if he could call my mother Mom. Eric always showed me respect, and it meant a lot. When we walked outside to his car, I saw Eric's latest project in the back seat, a cat that had a bad leg that needed some help. He always had at least one project on the go. Soon after he left, I called to invite him and Sally to help us with one of our projects, an Iowa State course on One Health in Uganda that really needed his expertise and passion. And then that's the last time we talked.
Thank you.
I'm going to try this. I don't know how well it's going to work. I'm Kimberly Ortiz. I was Doc's tech for 14 years. That might be all I can say. He was an amazing person. He had a wicked sense of humor. He used to take my daughter Leia, who's now 18, she was 4 at the time, and he would take her to the park or to an amusement park or something, and he would joke that he would fill her up with sugar and give her back to me. He thought that was hilarious. He would let her join in on surgeries. I mean, who does that? Who lets little children join, in on surgeries? But Doc did. And I'm sorry I call him Doc. I've never called him Eric. I don't think ever. Some of the greatest memories I have of Doc are just his stupid jokes, our long car rides to the reservation there and back, and we would sing off key to songs on the radio. We would, Leia can attest to when she would be sleeping in the back seat and she would wake up to us trying to read each other's minds. I was better at it than he was. And he said it used to freak him out, and sometimes he would threaten to throw me out of the car. The time that he had to pull over so me and Leia could go to the restroom on the side of the road because we were in a blizzard. So that was funny. And he was like, "Can you wait?" And I'm like, "No." We really have to go, and because we had to leave a clinic so fast because a blizzard was coming. And so we just jumped in the car, and so he was joking about that. And then many of his jokes were me getting lost, and that happened a lot. So I would call him, I wrote this on Facebook, I would call him and ask him something, and he would say, "Do you have balloons?" And I would say, "No, Doc, I don't have balloons. I have 1% left on my phone. I need you to tell me how to get out of here." And he was like, "Well, can you get some balloons?" I'm like, "I cannot get balloons." So he was always trying to make me laugh and always trying to save me, which he did a lot. He taught me everything. And it's because of him that I met Dr. Lori, and I met Sally, and I met everyone, Dan. I met him when he was littler. And so I just basically wanted to say that there's no one like him, and it's because of him that we have Sovereign Nations Veterinary, and I'm so honored to be a part of it. And the other thing he used to tell me is I was the boss. So I would call and he would say, "Hey, boss." I'd be like, "I'm not the boss, you're the boss." And he was like, "No, you are." I wasn't. Well, I kind of was. There's a lot I could say, but there's not enough time to say everything. But I loved him, and he was a blessing, and he'll always be in our hearts. So thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Beth Wheeler, and the way that I met Eric is I had hired him to do 10 spays and neuters on my dogs, and he was supposed to be at my cabin on one day, but he got weathered out, and I met him as I was flying out to go to a doctor's appointment above the Arctic Circle, and he flew in. I didn't have a lock on my cabin, so it's not like I gave him a key, and he took my dog team that I'd taken to the airport back to my cabin, spent the night, did 10 spays and neuters under propane lights on my workbench, took care of my dogs while he was there, did I don't know how many spays and neuters in the Arctic village that I lived in, then flew out on the same plane that I flew back in on, and that's how I met Eric the first time. And it was kind of history after that. I think a lot of folks here kind of see that once you meet Eric, you become family, or you don't. There wasn't a whole lot of middle ground with Eric. You either loved him or you just went on your way. There wasn't, he was that kind of individual. He had such a big heart that he gave you everything he had. In the village, we couldn't afford to fly our dogs to the vet. It was 350 miles for me to take my dog to the vet. If he had not taken care of those dogs, I would have had to taken me a year, one by one, to get the dogs in. He understood that in the villages, we didn't have vet care, and he gave us a life-saving service out there. We loved our dogs. I used mine for transportation. They were a matter of life and death, and the services he brought to the bush were indispensable. And he continued to do that from the time that I met him up until the time he left Alaska. But that didn't stop the friendship. Just because he left the state, you don't stop being friends with Eric just because you're not around him. We did spays and neuters up until Keatna, sometimes 150 a weekend. I'd make schedules for him, and just I'd be the one checking people in, and he'd be doing the surgeries. We'd have dogs stacked up that were as they were coming out of it, and he'd have dogs stacked up as they were going into it, but that's what we did. And the dogs were safe, and we were watching them, and we never had any troubles with the animals, and he was conscientious, and he was so incredible, and it's hard to describe unless you've been up there in that situation. And then coming back down here, after he was down here, I eventually moved back down, and I got a phone call, and Eric said, "Hey, I've got a shortage on this clinic that I'm doing over on the Lower Brule. Do you suppose you can come and meet me?" And it's like, well, I'm down here taking care of my mom, but if I can, I'll be there. And that's kind of how all of us work. If Eric needed help, we were there, because anytime I needed help, I was living in Talkeetna, and I had a dog that was sick, and I called him, and he came and took a spleen out of a dog the size of a basketball, again under propane light with no electricity or running water. Saved that dog's life for me. And so when Eric called me and said, "Could you come to the Lower Brule?" I didn't hesitate, because at the Lower Brule, I met people like Lori and Kimberly and some of these other folks that have become my family. And that's one of the things with Eric. The people around him are the same kind of folks. Eric teaches us how to give unconditionally. He shows us that doesn't matter who you are. The man was brilliant. He was extremely talented. And he always made you feel like the most incredible being and the most intelligent person around, when he was the one that had the knowledge and he was the one that had all the talents. Yet you were the one that felt special when you were around him. And like I said, it's hard to describe, but those of us who know Eric and have been exposed to Eric, we all know. And the people that I've met through Eric, they become my family. And I can't say enough about Eric and thank the people that are part of Eric's family for continuing on his mission, and I hope we all can continue his mission and spread the kind of personality that Eric was. And just remember that doesn't matter who or what you are or how much you know, we need to treat each individual as important as Eric treated each one of us. Thank you.
My name is Leia Ortiz. I am Kimberly's daughter. Like she said, I don't know how this is going to turn out. Growing up, I don't remember the first time that I met Doc. I just remember him being in my life always. And I'm so grateful to have had him in my life. I am such a lucky kid to have been able to go to these clinics and be personally trained by Doc and to teach me what I know. I was homeschooled when I was younger, and when my mom worked at the clinic, she would take me with her. And it was always the greatest days because I would walk in and Doc would be there, and he would just give me a big hug and I would get to see his big smile. I have a stuffed animal, and when I would bring her to the clinic, he would do surgeries on her because I would say she was sick. And he would let me come in and watch him do the surgeries. And I would be so happy when she would come out and we would do like practice recoveries. And to this day, I still have the stuffed animal. Doc was like a grandfather to me. I remember when I had studied in Israel, I had volunteered at a vet clinic, and I would always ask him questions. I'd be like, it was just the greatest thing to have a response. I'd be like, oh, what is this? Or what can I do about this? And he would always respond, or he would call me and he would guide me through the things that I needed to do. And as my mom said, the one thing I always remember is his jokes. I loved all the silly jokes he would have. I remember him taking me to the fairs and sugaring me up and trying to get the sugar out by getting me on the slides, and I would just slide over and over and over. Today, I am the person I am because of Doc. Not a lot of kids know what they want to be when they grow up, but always because of Doc, I've always known who I want to be and what I want to be. And I know that I am going to be a great vet in the honor of him, and I will try my very best. Because the very first clinic that I was at the very end, he hugged me and said that I am amazing and that I will do great things in life. And that was the day I knew 100% sure that I will be a vet or a vet tech, and that Doc will always be in my heart, and I will always have him with me wherever I go, no matter what I do, no matter what surgery that I do, no matter where I go in life. Doc will be there with me, having his hand on my shoulder.
I want to thank those that took this time to, go ahead.
Terry Robbins, Chapel Choir, 1972 through 1978. Some of our parents are still here, and truth be told, some of that gray hair is attributable to these people over here. None of it is my fault. My time with Eric was in a short burst. 1974, 1975, and 1976. It related to cycling adventures across Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, and Arkansas. Eric and I got our fathers together, pulled out the map, and said, we're starting here and we're ending there. And we had no plan on where we were staying or how we were exactly going to finance this. And this was before there were cell phones or the internet. Today, parents would be locked up for child endangerment for letting us go do adventures like that. So thank you, Carlos, for not stopping us from a true adventure. And during that time, I took away two incredibly important things. Eric's equilibrium with nature was unmatched. He cared for everything and everyone. There would be a spider in the tent, not exactly something I liked, and Eric was so kind to show that spider the door. And before that, I did not really have a full appreciation for animal life. But more important than that was Eric's view of social justice. Everyone was the same. It didn't matter what your bank statement was. It didn't matter what clothes you had on. If you treated someone fairly, kindly, and nicely, you were Eric's friend. I lost track of Eric for 40 years, and I came back and read and saw his accomplishments, and I was not the least bit surprised. Thank you.
So again, following the service, there'll be a time to share more stories and memories with one another downstairs. But for now, the choir group from 73 and 77 will join together in singing "The Lord Bless You and Keep You."